There's been a lot said over the last 2 days. Sue Gardner started us off on Monday night with an incredible intervention, which I know we've been talking about and processing and agreeing and disagreeing with over the last 2 days. But we've heard some amazing things in this room. We've heard in our exchange session, starting with the coffee house and leading us down into the 360s, a myriad of topics that have covered technology, isolation, community, belonging, what's next for citizenship, what does innovation in this space look like, how do we become more inclusive? And so this session, this concluding session of 6 Degrees, is a chance for us to take stock. What was said? What does it mean for us right now? And what does it mean for our future? Where do we go from here, and how do we make these conversations real, applicable, and operational?
And what was amazing in the Indigenous session was there are people who've had a really, really tough time for 100 and 150 years, and they are saying, look, here's the way through. Here's what we think we can do. And it was partly with the laws and mechanisms in place, and it was partly by expanding the circle and including new things. So it was incredibly optimistic coming from people who've had the toughest time of anybody in this country.
I feel like what Yasha is arguing, I think, is that we have mechanisms for the will of the people to be made felt, right? And those mechanisms are the institutions of democracy and civil society organizations, and that is how power is held to account. And I felt like in this room, there was a sense of alienation from the institutions of democracy and maybe even from democracy itself. And I felt like there was a hunger and an interest in going forward into having new mechanisms for power to be felt, right? Like post-democratic institutions and certainly post-national institutions. And that felt to me so dangerous. It felt to me incredibly dangerous. And it made me feel, Larry Lessig, the law scholar in the United States and the father of Creative Commons, had this line that he used to say, which was, when democracy goes away, it doesn't get replaced by paradise. It gets replaced by other interests. And so what I kept feeling myself this morning in the conversation, where I know that we are hungering for more and I know that we are hungering for better, but I feel like what we're risking is like the cyberpunk future that was foretold 10 and 20 years ago in Snow Crash and Neuromancer, as you just reminded me, right? What we're risking is rule by Facebook. What we're risking is rule by big tech, right? I feel like we need to invest in our democratic structures and strengthen them and make them better and make them decently inclusive and et cetera. And if we don't do that, we risk going down a much, much, much darker road. And that is the road that we're on.
See around this conversation. This is a conversation the world needs. And it needs it urgently, which means we need to actually be thinking about solutions and things that we can move forward in our world. And what I heard this morning was an interesting juxtaposition of concepts here. On the one end of the spectrum, we were talking a lot about big C citizenship, the mechanics of what allows us to vote, to have a passport, to cross borders, to go from place to place. But frankly, those are the power mechanics. How do we actually exercise our power as citizens to change the world? At the other end of the spectrum was the aspirational stuff, the belonging stuff, small c, right? I want to be a citizen of my community, of my planet, of my whatever it may be, my ethnicity. And it was interesting because instead of thinking of the two as mutually exclusive, I think what would be really important where we can make a difference in the world is in finding effective ways to marry the two. Without creating more belonging, we are going to allow the mechanics to get weaker. And by focusing too much on the mechanics, we're going to make the mechanics get weaker. But there is a way to introduce a lot more belonging for the disenfranchised in our society and get them to exercise their power more responsibly and more effectively.
Feeling that there is a tremendous sense of will around this room. People that are here to make a difference, to overcome the tremendous number of issues that have been talked about, exclusion, not belonging, racism, all of the things that have torn us apart. There is a sense of urgency and a profound need right now for people here feeling that they need to do something about it in a very united way.
So my name is Chris, and this is my first time at 6 Degrees, and it really opened my eyes. Coming in, I was like, is there really a diversity and inclusion problem in Canada? And, you know, it feels like, you know, the gap is not big. And it really showed that even though I'm an Asian minority, I myself have privilege. What I discovered was that the major gap in terms of individuals being disfranchised, people who did not have a voice, is significant. However, I'm leaving the conference with a very optimistic mindset. I would say that overall, on an optimism basis, I'm very optimistic that we can pass on to the new generation to kind of figure out this whole problem. And there's multiple reasons for it. Number one is that they will be the ones living with what we built and the democracy and the system that we developed. If we don't have them in our discussions, give them a voice, it's highly problematic.
I feel a lot of optimism. I'm going to be shaky. Because what I've heard here is an openness. You got this. Thank you. To exactly that. An openness to accept empathy and our emotions
Take your
as
time.
critical pieces to making whatever it is we build work. So it's not instead of the hard line items that come from business and the concepts of democracy and citizenship. You have to put both. And in this space, I'm hearing that. So that's where my optimism comes from. When we deliberately include emotions and empathy within the context of the structured things, whatever we build will be stronger and will last longer.
Okay, I have noticed, this is an area that I read a lot about. I have noticed that the most astonishing reaction to the kind of social collapse, the rise of the right, et cetera, today, among a large part of the intellectual liberal class has been to retreat and say, the problem here is emotion. The problem here is empathy. We have to get back to rationality, by which they mean go back to what actually caused the problem. They don't mean rationality. They mean go back to a very narrow thing which doesn't open up to people's needs as citizens and humans.
Just being in this space with so many bright minds, so many intellectuals, and so many powerful voices, it has given me a lot of optimism after all I see is negativity on the social media and whatnot. So definitely it has given me a lot of optimism, but when I think about what's next, the pessimistic side kind of kicks in. And there are two things that I worried about the most. First thing is the intellectuals who are on our side, who are leading the narrative for inclusion, for diversity. They're gonna be debating the minutia and worrying about the fundamental concepts, whether or not there should be a global citizenship, whether or not we should have borders or not, utopian ideas. And I look at the other side, and it's a well-oiled machine that is spreading the the message of authoritarianism, exclusion, xenophobia, racism. It's a well-oiled machine, and they're well-centered around the message. So I see it's a lot easier for them to convert a lot of people. And we will be busy debating the finer details, and the ship is going to sink. Yeah. And the second thing that worries me is that not everyone who disagrees, not everyone who questions immigration is a racist. Who is engaging those people who genuinely feel, and they genuinely worry about, they worry about immigration, they worry about their rights being taken away, they worry about crime. They ask the questions and they're told, no, you're racist, shut down. So who is engaging them in this debate and having this honest conversation with them? Like, what are you worried about? All right, let's talk. I feel that it's not happening enough, and we'll keep losing people who are neutral to the other side because they are well-oiled, they're well-organized, and they're well-connected to the central message of it. Thank you.
I did not hear a lot of references to people with disabilities, but we cross all cultures, all societies, and all economies. So what can we do? These are very basic, practical points that still are not being done. And the first thing is to invite us to the table. Hear our voice. We have great experiences in problem solving because we have to do it every single day. So draw on our expertise. Secondly, shift our language. The language around disability is so negative. It reinforces the negative stereotypes. So let's shift our language so that it's positive. And thirdly, recognize and tell people about the contribution they can make to our society, because they are often separate and they are often devalued. So I focus on people with disabilities, but it can apply to any of the groups.
What I heard this morning, when we have very honest conversations about democracy, is not so much that we want to dismantle democracy, but more that there are people that are excluded and that feel excluded, and that means we don't want to tear it apart, we want to reimagine it. And in that sense, I think what we want to do, it's within the very conceptual heart of a liberal democracy to always strive to do better. Do not say, this is the status quo, we must maintain this.
And I want to return to talking a little bit about the theme of this year, about technology and citizenship. I've heard an enormous amount of anti-tech rhetoric here over the last couple of days, talking about that online life is not real life, and that's a question I'd really like to challenge. And I'd really like us to think a lot about, I understand that we have that rhetoric because we have a lot of fear. We're scared of our economy. We're scared of the corporatism. We're scared of the disconnection it can create. However, I really want to think about demanding properly from government and from civil society to take technology as a serious tool of reimagining the future. We do have the opportunity to ask people to get us away from the corporate structures, from the systems of power that it's reproduced, and really take it as a tool of reimagining the future so we can take it on as a tool of empowerment. So when you're thinking about tech and citizenship, there's an enormous amount that tech can do for citizenship, but we all need to get away from that rhetoric and think about the way that we can move it there. So
it's great that we're all here. We're all here because we all agree. Where are those people that don't agree? How are we going to get to them? So this is a problem that we wrestle with. Number one, because we don't really want to invite them here. But not because we dislike them necessarily, but because we don't think it would be a productive occasion. It would just divide us into a dichotomy of, the kind of thing you see on American television all the time. What we do here is have complex conversations, and what your job is, having been here, is to go out in the world and be the emissary of what's happened here. So instead of having 3 people from the wrong side up here fighting and then leaving in a huff, we thought we'd have 360 people here, which we did for the last 48 hours, and have the complex conversation at multiple levels and send you off in the world with a new obligation and hopefully with a new language. And it's
this year confirmed for me that there is no more urgent matter than bringing together people who have stopped believing in democracy with people who want to make it better. And that is a dynamic conversation that must continue.
I have lived to see business enshrined as the be-all and end-all, the making of money to be the be-all and end-all. To see kids going into business in high school. And I make a plea for what I was brought up with, and you can say I'm out of date, but I don't think so, which is public service counts, giving your life to something that matters, that will have an influence on other people's lives. That is what counts.
If you have a difficulty because you have a physical disability, or you come from a minority which has been excluded, or you're indigenous and you've been, you had a deal that it was broken and now you're making your way back in, then what that means is that you're incredibly conscious. You're incredibly conscious about what is required in order to be a citizen, because it doesn't just come easily, when you get up in the morning and roll out of bed. And that consciousness may feel very, very tiring And I think it is very, very tiring. I can say this as a white male. I know it's very tiring because I have all my friends who say, my God, how long does this go on? It goes on forever. It's very tiring, but on the other hand, it's very conscious. So it's an enormous strength. We always say here at citizenship ceremonies that refugees and immigrants to countries have already proved they're going to be good citizens because they're already proved they're conscious, courageous, and decisive. I didn't have to prove that. I was born here. I didn't have to do any of those things to be a citizen. So that kind of idea that people who somehow are not part of the majority as defined in the past or the power center are actually the strongest citizens precisely because they're the most conscious citizens. And I think it's opening up to all of that, which is, in a way, the next chapter of democracy and inclusion.